One day last spring, the superintendent of Virginia Military Institute, General J.H. Benford P., joined VMI administrators, VMI construction office staff, and contractors to put shovel to ground, initiating a project that will transform the northern entrance to downtown Lexington. The spot where they stood that day might once have been the site of one of two African-American bed and breakfast establishments in segregated Lexington. The group could gaze across Diamond Street at Cameron Hall, where the homes of two African-American families once stood. They could also see the back of another house, once the residence of an African-American family, along Main Street. One building stood out, partially because of its height. With a basement and 2 stories, it was certainly the tallest building at the site. But it was remarkable also for that sense of quiet an empty building possesses. It had been vacant since 2005, and for its unique appearance.
The building itself is noteworthy architecturally, not so much for its design, but rather for the material in which it's constructed. It strikes us as unusual today. It's man-made stone.
The concrete rustic stone building block was made locally by H.A. Donald, who, Colonel Gibson said, was known in the community as the man who could make stone for you. It was fireproof, easy to maintain, and cheaper than stone.
That was very appealing to the late Victorian era, to create imitation materials that represented something more expensive.
The abandoned structure, made of this unusual material and in great disrepair, is what General P. and the others saw that day. What they didn't see was the liveliness that once characterized the neighborhood in which they stood, and the odd way in which life met death in a building that had housed both a dance hall and a funeral parlor.
The building, and I don't mind saying I think it's ugly because it is ugly. The building, though, has important meanings. It's a building that was uniquely a part of the black community, and there were different things in the building at different times. When I was a boy, I remembered that the storefront right there on the ground level was a funeral parlor. It was Smith's Funeral Home, and so that was the black funeral parlor because funerals and cemeteries were totally segregated when I was growing up. Smith's Funeral Home buried my grandfather in the early 50s.
The structure wasn't built primarily as a commercial site, though, and while the northern part of Main Street downtown was home to a vigorous community of African American businesses, this building encouraged a different kind of sharing among the residents.
The structure in 1926, 1927 was built by an African American fraternal organization called the Knights of Pythias. It was a group, the first of its kind, actually chartered immediately after the Civil War, and finds its place here in Lexington as a focal point of the local African American community. I think it was evident that it would become a moving point in the African American community, and they desired their own very impressive meeting place right on Main Street of Lexington. So they built this very permanent building out of man-made stone, a strong statement of their presence in the community.
The building was a social center for the black community. The building served various social functions for a community that was at the time a lot larger and a lot more vibrant than the black community is today.
During the World War II era and into the 50s and 60s, the building was used in this way. The Rhythm Makers, a band of local residents, played in the building. Some of its members still live in Lexington. Dances were held in the basement.
It was an exciting building. They had jazz, in fact, the story goes that even Duke Ellington played there at one time.
Later, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the Johnson Davis Post of the American Legion, one of few African-American American Legion posts in the nation, met in the building. The storefronts, too, changed over the years, with the last one being a tattoo parlor. The building was acquired by VMI in 2005. It was one of several, said Dr. Delaney, that became available as their residents, whose heirs had moved away, died. 2 of these structures have been razed to make way for new construction. The Pythias building, though, will be preserved.
The importance of this structure to the community of Lexington, to the Diamond Hill community, and the nature of the construction itself suggested strongly that the building be moved and preserved and preserved for an adaptive use. It's to be determined at some future time.
The decision to preserve the building was made in concert with the community of Lexington, an outgrowth, said Historic Lexington Foundation Executive Director Don Hasfurther, of a movement that originated in the 1960s to preserve not just the grand buildings, but also the vernacular architecture. This one is particularly important because of its importance to the African American community.
This Knights of Pythias building was one of many buildings here on North Main Street that were part of the African American community largely, and it's the last one. I'm really pleased that VMI has decided to preserve this property. It came with a lot of community discussion.
The concept of adaptive renovation of a historic structure provides an opportunity to save the essence of an earlier time of architectural taste, of structural materials, yet creates an internal space that can accommodate modern usages in the 21st century.
And the meanings that the building has to Lexington are many, and my God, by now it's a landmark. I mean, it's that Oddfellows large building on Main Street, the same way Cameron Hall is a landmark, or the same way First Baptist is a landmark. You see these buildings and they have a meaning to them.
But doesn't the importance of a landmark reside partially in the location it marks? Not necessarily, said Dr. Delaney. A small move measured in feet, not miles, does not disturb the significance of the landmark.
This is a good thing. This is a positive thing for VMI to be a good neighbor with regard not to just the Black community, but the whole community of Lexington.
Lexington, after all, is a historic community, Dr. Delaney said, pointing out that the VMI Post itself is listed in the National Register of Historic Places.
So my hat goes off to VMI for doing this.